It was a typical Monday morning at St. Helena Medical Center, busy, noisy, and buzzing with urgency. Phones rang constantly, intercoms blared out code calls, and nurses in navy scrubs wheeled gurneys through polished hallways while doctors called instructions down crowded corridors. For the staff, it was just another hectic start to another long week. But everything changed in a moment. The glass doors at the ER entrance slid open with a soft hiss. At first, no one noticed. Then a gasp cut through the commotion. Heads turned. A German Shepherd, tall, lean, with a coat smeared in mud and something darker, stepped through the door. He had no collar, no human with him. But there was something purposeful in the way he walked, focused, steady. This wasn't a stray wandering in by accident. Then someone screamed. Strapped across his back with torn cloth and rope was a little girl, limp, conscious. No older than 7? Her arms hung at his sides, her face pale, hair tangled and crusted with dried blood. The entire lobby froze. A receptionist's pen dropped to the floor. A doctor mid-sentence fell silent, eyes wide. The dog's nails clicked rhythmically on the tile floor as he moved toward the front desk, eyes locked forward, intense, alert. Not wild, not scared, but pleading. It was like time stopped. The hospital, usually so loud, fell into stunned silence. Where did he come from? How did he get her here? The truth hit everyone like a cold wind. This dog hadn't gotten lost, had brought her here. Whatever happened to that child, it was urgent. Life or death urgent. No one could quite believe what they were seeing. The dog, worn and silent, stood at the center of the emergency room. His breathing was heavy. His fur was soaked with grime, but he didn't falter. He didn't collapse. He waited. The first to move was Nurse Jenna Morris, 28, sharp under pressure, and experienced with pediatric trauma. But nothing in her career had prepared her for this. Her eyes darted from the child to the dog's fierce, unwavering stare. Cautiously, she stepped forward. The shepherd's ears twitched. He lowered his head and let out a low growl, not threatening but protective. It was a sound filled with warning and fear. He was still guarding her. Jenna paused, heart pounding. Her training told her to stay alert, but something else deeper, instinctual, told her to trust him. She knelt slowly. Her voice was calm and steady. "It's okay, buddy," she said gently. "I'm here to help her. I promise." The dog didn't move. His eyes studied hers. And then slowly, he stepped back half a step. That was all Jenna needed. She moved quickly but carefully, lifting the girl into her arms. The child was frighteningly light. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow. Jenna cradled her close and turned toward the trauma bays. "We've got a pediatric emergency," she shouted. "Prep trauma room 3 now." The emergency room snapped into motion. Stretchers rolled in. Monitors powered on. Emergency kits popped open. But behind all the motion, Max the dog stood still, watching. He didn't bolt. He didn't bark. He followed. Inside trauma room 3, tension snapped like electricity. Dr. Raj Patel, the hospital's lead emergency physician, burst in just as Jenna placed the girl onto the gurney. Monitors lit up, oxygen hissed and gloved. Hands moved with practiced speed, placing sensors on the child's chest, threading IVs, attaching oxygen lines, heart rate unstable. A nurse called. "BP's crashing," said another. "She's hypothermic," Dr. Patel muttered. "Get the fluids in. Oxygen, 15 liters. Warm her up now." But even in all that movement, one thing haunted the room: the unknown. Who was this girl? No ID, no shoes, no clue where she came from, nothing but dirt and bruises and that dog. For now, the chart said only one thing: Jane Doe, a nameless child on the edge of death. Brought in by a dog who had no voice to explain outside the trauma. Bay Max paced back and forth. His nails tapped anxiously on the tile. Every time someone walked in or out, he tried to follow. Security gently pushed him back. He never growled, never barked, just waited. Eventually, one of the younger nurses, moved by his quiet desperation, walked over to the guard and whispered, Let him in. He's not going anywhere without her. The guard hesitated, then nodded. The door opened. Max stepped inside without hesitation. He walked to the gurney and sat down right beside it, his eyes locked on the monitors, the wires, and the girl. No one dared move him. He wasn't in the way. He was part of the room. A few feet beyond the trauma room, nurses, techs, and even a couple of janitors gathered near the glass. Quiet, reverent, none of them had ever seen anything like it. Max never budged from the girl's side. He didn't flinch when machines beeped or when doctors shouted instructions. He just sat there silent, still watchful, as if he understood every moment. Later, Nurse Jenna stood at the security desk, holding the dog's worn collar. She turned it over in her hands. Nothing. No name, no tag. Just cracked leather, aged by years of wear. "Did we scan him for a chip?" she asked. A technician nodded. "Already did. Nothing. No registration. No ID." Jenna frowned. "He didn't just show up here. He brought her here on purpose." Down the hallway, security pulled up the footage from the early morning. The grainy video played back on the monitor. Max, emerging from the dense woods behind the hospital, carrying the child. Across his back, he paused at the door, waited for it to open, and walked in like he'd done it 100 times. No hesitation. No confusion. One of the security guards, eyes fixed on the screen, muttered, "That's not a stray." Back in trauma room 3, Dr. Patel adjusted the girl's oxygen flow. He glanced at Max, then back to the vitals. "She's stabilizing," he said quietly, still critical. "But she's fighting." Max let out a soft exhale. His ears twitched slightly. He'd done his job now. He was just waiting for her to come back. By early afternoon, Detective Ben Carter pulled into the parking lot at St. Helena Medical Center. He was a calm, measured man, known among his peers for instincts sharper than most. Carter had worked plenty of tough cases in his 20 years with the force. But nothing quite like this. He listened quietly as Nurse Jenna and hospital security replayed the surveillance footage for him. Max. The trees behind the hospital like a ghost, with a child strapped to his back. The way he walked, tongue-shaken, deliberate, caught Carter's attention immediately. He watched the video twice, then folded his arms, brows furrowed. He came out of the forest, he muttered. "That's county land. Just trees, trails, and empty space for miles." The detective didn't usually get sentimental about animals, but something about this dog, it stuck with him. There was intelligence in Max's movements, yes, but more than that. There was intention. "This wasn't luck," Carter said quietly, glancing toward the thick green line of trees at the back of the property. "This dog brought her here because he knew where to go." By 3 p.m., a search team had assembled. Outside the ER, Carter stood with local law enforcement, a K-9 unit, and Ranger Miles Cooper, seasoned tracker who had spent over 20 years patrolling the woods bordering the city, tall, quiet, and built like a tree himself. Cooper took one look at Max and squatted down beside him. "You know the way back, don't you, boy?" he asked. Max didn't bark, didn't move at first. Then slowly he stood, turned toward the door, took a step, and looked back as if to say, "Follow me." They did. The group moved across the hospital's back lot, down a drainage ditch, and into the thick arms of the forest. The terrain grew rough quickly, broken branches, mud, tangled roots, and slippery slopes. But Max never stopped. He didn't sniff the ground like a normal tracker dog. We just moved, deliberate, sure-footed, like he was retracing a memory. After nearly an hour of weaving through the woods in tense silence, Max slowed. There it was. A makeshift camp hidden beneath a nest of branches and leaves just off an old trail no longer used. Torn plastic tarps rustled in the wind. There were wrappers, burned firewood, empty bottles, and worse, a blood-stained blanket. A child's small, dirty shoe. "Jesus," someone whispered. Ranger Cooper crouched and held up the shoe. She was here, and she wasn't alone. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the energy had shifted. Daytime chaos gave way to a deeper, more focused kind of tension. The lights dimmed in the pediatric intensive care unit. Machines beeped softly. Whispers filled the hallways in room 308. Max lay curled on a thin blanket beside the hospital bed. He hadn't left her side since she was brought in. Not once. The girl still logged in the system as Jane Doe remained unconscious. Her breathing shallow but steady under the oxygen mask. Her face had regained a bit of color, but her body was still a map of bruises and scrapes. Nurses tiptoed around Max. They offered him water, set out a bowl of food, brought in a blanket. He barely touched any of it. He only lifted his head when someone entered or when her monitors beeped. Mostly he lay there watching, protecting. Then, just before dawn, something changed. It was subtle, a quiet gasp, then another. Max's ears perked up instantly. He stood, cautiously stepping closer to the bed. The night nurse, half asleep with a clipboard in her lap, looked up. Her eyes widened. "Doctor?" she called, rushing to the door. But Max had already moved first. He rested his chin gently on the mattress. Eyes locked on the girl's face as her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, hesitantly, they opened. She blinked, confused at first, unfocused. Then, her gaze found him. Her lips barely moved. "Max," she whispered, the name just a breath. Max let out a quiet, broken whine and nudged his nose against her hand, softly, gently, like he'd been holding his breath all night. The room flooded with quiet tears. The nurse called for the pediatrician, but nothing, not even a full staff of medical experts, could explain what they were witnessing. That bond, that reunion. In that moment, they all understood Max hadn't just rescued her, he had waited with her. For her, until she came back by sunrise. Sophie's name had been confirmed. A school database matched her face. She was 8 years old, Sophie Whitfield, missing for nearly 3 days. Her mother had reported her disappearance just 48 hours earlier. The connection between the girl and the dog now had a name too. Max. And it was becoming clearer he hadn't just wandered in. He had stayed by her side during her darkest hours. He had carried her out of danger. He had brought her to safety. That morning, Dr. Eliza Monroe, a pediatric psychologist, sat down beside Sophie's bed. Her voice was calm, patient, and kind. "Sophie," she said softly, "I know this is hard, but when you feel strong enough, can you tell me what happened?" Sophie's tiny fingers curled into Max's fur. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a fragile whisper, she began. "There was a man," she said. "I think his name was Alan. He used to come to our street, fix stuff for our neighbors. He always smiled, waved at me. I didn't think he was a bad guy." Dr. Monroe stayed quiet, listening. "One day, Max and I were playing in the yard. He pulled up in a truck, said my mom sent him, that there was an emergency. I didn't even think twice. I got in." Sophie's voice faltered. Her eyes drifted to a fixed point on the wall. "But he didn't take me to my mom. He kept driving. For hours. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up we were in the woods. He said we were camping, that it was safer." Voice dropped lower. At first he was quiet, pretended everything was normal. But then, something changed. He got angry, started talking to himself, yelling at people who weren't there. Dr. Monroe leaned in just slightly, her presence steady. Sophie swallowed hard. "He said the world was dangerous, that I didn't need my mom anymore. Just him." She paused again. "When I tried to leave, he screamed. He hit me." Tears welled in her eyes now. Max barked and tried to stop him. He kicked Max hard. She turned her face into Max's fur and whispered, "I don't remember much after that." Silence lingered in the room, broken only by the soft beeping of the heart monitor. "I thought I was going to die," she said. "I couldn't scream, I couldn't run. I just waited. I thought nobody would find me." Then her voice shifted gentler. "But Max didn't leave me. Not even when I passed out. He stayed. He found a way to bring me home." Dr. Monroe's eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak. She couldn't. This wasn't just a kidnapping case. It was a story of survival, of resilience, and of a dog's unwavering loyalty. The day after Sophie awoke, the energy at St. Helena Medical Center began to shift. At first, it was just whispers between nurses. Then it moved down corridors into waiting rooms, and eventually beyond the hospital walls. The story of the brave German shepherd who carried a wounded girl into the ER had already reached local news outlets. But now, with Sophie awake and speaking, the full weight of the story was beginning to land. Detective Ben Carter wasted no time. With Sophie's clear-eyed testimony and the discovery of the makeshift campsite deep in the woods, a task force mobilized. They followed every thread she provided, starting with the man she named. His name was Alan Price, 39 years old, former handyman who had once done minor repairs on homes in Sophie's neighborhood. A man with no criminal record, but a history of mental health evaluations that had gone largely ignored. They traced his movements through toll booths, its back roads, and finally, a grainy security camera from a gas station 15 miles from the woods where Sophie had been found. The footage showed a rusted pickup truck pulling into the lot just 2 days before, while Sophie was inside. Now, the footage showed him alone wandering back and forth by the station's entrance, muttering to himself, fidgeting, looking over his shoulder. It was clear he knew something was closing in. 2 days later, police found him pacing along a roadside just outside that same gas station. He didn't run, didn't resist. He just stood there with an empty gaze and trembling hands. When they opened his backpack, they found a handful of items: a broken friendship bracelet, a child's sketchbook, a pack of unopened gummy bears, all belonging to Sophie. It wasn't like that, he stammered as the handcuffs clicked into place. She needed me. I was protecting her. But no one was listening. Not anymore. Back at the hospital, Sophie had been moved into a private recovery room. She was still weak, her voice soft, but her color had returned. She had started eating again, sitting up more each day. She even smiled once or twice, and through it all, Max remained her constant. He never left her side. Even when the doctors needed to check her vitals or change her dressings, Max stayed close. He didn't bark or growl. He just watched carefully, as if making sure no one hurt her again. Bond between them was undeniable. And to the staff at St. Helena, it was sacred then. Just before sunset one evening, the elevator dinged open on the pediatric floor. Mara Whitfield stepped out. Sophie's mother looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back. In a messy twist, her face pale and sunken. She clutched a crumpled tissue in one hand. Her eyes were wild with hope and fear. When she saw her daughter through the window of room 312, her knees buckled. A nurse caught her before she hit the floor. "I thought she was gone," Mara whispered. "I thought I'd never see her again." Inside the room, Sophie sat upright, holding Max's paw gently in her lap. She turned toward the door and blinked uncertain at first, then gasped. "Mom?" she breathed. Mara rushed through the door and dropped to her knees beside the bed. She grabbed her daughter's face in her trembling hands, kissing her cheeks, her forehead, her hands over and over. "Oh my God," she cried. "My baby. My sweet girl. I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have protected you." Sophie's tears ran down her cheeks as she wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. They held each other like the world had stopped, and then Max stood. He took one step forward and looked at Mara. She turned toward him through blurred vision. She reached out a shaking hand and placed it on his head. "You saved her," she whispered. "You brought her back to me." Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark or move. He simply stood there, calm, steady, loyal. He knew what he had done. He didn't need recognition. He just needed her to be safe. Over the next few days, Sophie's strength grew little by little. She took her first steps against Maul, shaky ones holding her mother's hand, with Max never more than a foot away. The hospital staff watched with a mix of admiration and quiet reverence. Nurses from other wings came by to offer their goodbyes. Some brought flowers. Others left cards on the WINDOWSILL. One nurse gently tied a red ribbon around Max's neck and whispered, "You're a real hero, buddy." Max didn't react, but his presence filled the room with something unspoken, powerful. It was the kind of love that needed no words that morning. The sun was already high in the sky when Sophie was cleared for discharge. The doctors gathered at the nurses' station as Sophie, Mara, and Max stepped into the hallway. A few clapped. Others just smiled with tears in their eyes. Sophie wore a pale yellow sweater and held a stuffed rabbit someone had given her. Max walked beside her, slow and sure, every step in rhythm with hers. At the top of the hospital steps, Mara paused. She looked out into the world alive with birdsong traffic and the scent of fresh-cut grass. It all felt so different now. Sophie turned to Max and knelt gently beside him. "You brought me home." Wrapping her arms around his neck, Max leaned into her hug and rested his chin on her shoulder. Mara stood behind them, a single, tears sliding down her cheek, not from fear, but from something closer to peace. And then, the three of them, mother, daughter, and dog, walked forward. Out of the hospital, out of the nightmare, and into the light. The story didn't end at the hospital steps, in fact. For many across the country, that's where it truly began. Within hours of Sophie's discharge, photos of Max walking alongside her in front of St. Helena Medical Center began circulating online. A local reporter who had caught wind of the story posted a short video clip of Max entering the ER with Sophie tied to his back. It was grainy surveillance footage, but the image struck like lightning by nightfall. The story had gone viral. Hero dog carries girl to hospital after forest ordeal. German shepherd saves kidnapped child's life. Guardian angel with 4 paws. News outlets picked it up from coast to coast. Morning shows invited the Whitfields to speak. Animal rescue organizations called nonstop. Max's photo was everywhere, on TV, on websites, in magazines, on posters. But for Sophie and her mom, the fame wasn't important. What mattered was healing, safety, a return to some kind of normal they moved in with. Mara's sister in a quiet neighborhood. Few towns over, a place with tall trees, soft wind chimes, and neighbors who didn't ask too many questions. Max, of course, came with them. At night, he slept curled at the foot of Sophie's bed. During the day, he followed her from room to room, silent, gentle, always watching. Her therapist, Dr. Elisa Monroe, continued weekly sessions. Slowly, with Max always nearby, Sophie began to open up. Some things took longer, like riding in cars, or walking past tall white vans, or sleeping without the light on. But progress came. One morning, Sophie sat at the kitchen table coloring when she looked up and said, "Can Max have a collar with his name on it now?" Mara smiled, blinking away tears. "Good sweetheart." The next day, a red leather collar arrived in the mail. On it, a brass plate engraved. Max, loyal to the Eon to Sophie, placed it around his neck herself. He stood still for her, tail giving a soft wag as if he knew. Meanwhile, Detective Ben Carter was still tying up the final details of the case. Alan Price had been charged with multiple felonies, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. Though he claimed mental instability, his carefully packed supplies and secluded camp painted a different picture. The trial made headlines. But what made a deeper impact was the focus on Max Carter. He usually kept a strict boundary between work and personal emotion, found himself moved in a way few cases ever managed. He petitioned the county's animal services to ensure Max would never be impounded, made sure the dog was formally recognized as Sophie's guardian. "You carried her out of hell," Carter said during one of his hospital visits. "Earned your place." Back in their quiet new home, Sophie began writing again, something she hadn't done since the incident. At first, it was just short journal entries. But then came a letter. It was titled simply, "To Max." She wrote, "Dear Max, you didn't have to stay with me. You could have run away when he hurt you. Could have left me in the forest, but you didn't. You stayed. You kept me warm. You licked my hand even when I couldn't talk. You made me feel like I wasn't alone, and when I couldn't walk. You carried me. People say you're just a dog. I think you're something more. Maybe you're an angel, or a piece of home with 4 legs. Maybe you were meant to find me. Thank you for being my best friend. I love you." Sophie, she left it folded under his paw while he napped in the sun. He didn't read it, of course. Oh, But when he woke and found it, he laid his chin down over the paper like it was something precious. And in a way, it was. A few months later, St. Helena Medical Center held a special ceremony. It wasn't large, just a small gathering of hospital staff, local law enforcement, and the Whitfield family. Max stood on a small platform, his coat shiny and his posture proud. He wore his red collar and a new vest embroidered with gold thread honorary. K29 Street, Helena County. Nurse Jenna, who had first lifted Sophie from Max's back that day, gave a short speech. "I've seen a lot of bravery in this job," she said, her voice cracking. "But what I saw that morning in the ER changed me forever. This dog, Max, didn't just protect Sophie. He believed in her. And he believed in us." The room gave a standing ovation. Later, Max was awarded a custom-made dog tag and certificate. From the American Veterinary Hero Association, Animal Planet reached out to produce a documentary. A children's book was published called Max's Journey, with Sophie listed as co-author and creative inspiration. Despite the attention, the Whitfields remained private. Sophie preferred walks in the park and bedtime stories to cameras and interviews. She never liked being called the girl who was taken. She liked being Max's best friend a whole lot more. One evening, sitting on the porch swing with her mom, Sophie asked, "Do you think Max remembers?" Mara looked down at the dog dozing at their feet. "I think Max remembers everything," she said. "But I think he also forgives everything too." Sophie smiled and rested her head on her mom's shoulder. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the grass. Max raised his head for a moment, ears flicking at a bird call, then settled again. The world was quiet, whole, healing, and Max, as always, was right where he belonged.